At this moment, attention squarely focused on who's likely to win the presidential elections in the United States. If you think Maharashtra and Jharkhand are tight elections, don't know, can't say, too close to call, well, the United States is a whole different ballgame. And to talk about this, we're joined on this broadcast by Ishaan Tharoor. He's a well-known columnist at the Washington Post. I have Pramit Pal Chaudhuri, head of the India practice at Eurasia Group. And we have Arun Kumar Singh, who's been India's ambassador to the United States and is a non-resident senior fellow at Carnegie, India. I want to go across to Ishaan first. Ishaan, very rarely have pollsters and pundits been quite as confused. Are they just hedging their bets and therefore not giving clear answers? All these battleground states actually likely to go down to the wire in the way that these polls are suggesting?
Look, the polls have been suggesting for a very, very long time that it's a dead heat, and it is a dead heat. So, I mean, there's on a certain level, they're right. Of course, there are lots of different models, lots of different polls, and lots of different polls that say certain things, point to different trends happening that could tilt one way or the other. We're talking about an election where the difference will be such a narrow margin of votes that it's, of course, quite difficult to really know come Tuesday night, and probably not just Tuesday night, come Wednesday morning, perhaps even Thursday morning, what some of the results may be. And so we're in a situation now where, yes, because of the particular anachronism of the American system, it comes down to a handful of certain states that are really up in the air. And both campaigns think they're making a strong last push and hoping to consolidate some gains.
A lot of what you do, Pramit Pal, at the Eurasia Group is risk advisory. What is the Eurasia Group advising its clients in terms of who do you think is more likely to win at this moment? 46, 48, 49, 50. It's looking really, really tight. Is that how tight it's going to be? Or do you think everyone's just hedging because they can't be quite sure?
Well, I think that they can't be quite sure. I think the comeback companies, from what I remember of our American team, continues to believe Trump has an edge. But it's really down to, I think, one of the calculations, as little as 80,000 voters will make the decision. That's not a surprise. Biden defeated Trump with only about, I think, 45,000 votes made the decision for him, gave him the Electoral College. This time it'll go down to almost the same number. Once you're down to such tiny numbers, the polling is almost incapable of actually predicting anything. And on top of that, polling in America now is as bad as polling in India. It has repeatedly gotten got the last two presidential elections wrong. It's been incredibly poor in measuring, should we say, the degree of, in the last two elections, of Trump support. It grossly underestimated it. And then in the midterms, it swung in the other direction and overestimated Republican support. So if you look at a graph, there's a recent graph that came out by a group of pollsters who looked at it and said the degree of error now in U.S. polling is at a record high. America just can't work out what its own voters want to do.
It's not just America. Haryana shows us that that's the case in India as well, but that's a whole different conversation for another day. Ambassador Singh, you've seen American politics at close quarters during your time there. Looked at from the outside, this Trump campaign looks more organized than the 2016 campaign for sure, arguably more organized than 2020 as well. Your sense of who carries the momentum in the final stages?
So I had watched closely the elections in 2008, 12, 16, 20, and of course now the current one. And you're right that this time perhaps the Trump campaign is more organized, although Trump continues to be unpredictable, unpredictable in many ways. But I still think it's difficult to say who carries the momentum. Now, if you recall 2016, it was only after midnight that the Clinton campaign finally conceded that she might be losing and then came back to concede only the next day. And in the 2020 campaign, Biden came on stage late at night and said, although the trends seem to be against us, we are likely to win. So just hang on there. So I think, as you said, there was a sense that immediately after Kamala Harris' nomination came through, she had the edge. after a while, Trump was catching on. But of late, she's again got the momentum. So I think on balance, one should just say it's difficult to predict. And I think from India's point of view, it doesn't matter who wins.
Ishaan, let's build on that. Does it matter to India who wins? To some extent, in some ways, it does, because Trump comes in. If he increases tariffs, that impacts India. He's also more mercurial and transactional. On the other hand, Kamala Harris as president could potentially want to create more troubles for Prime Minister Modi and the Indian government in a lot of things that someone like Donald Trump won't care very much about.
I think the ambassador is right. There's been all signs from the Biden administration that India is a priority for the United States. They see India as a strategic partner in the future, and they wouldn't want to rock the boat. The wild card, as you said, is Trump's economic plans, his vision for really disrupting global trade and slapping tariffs on virtually everything. And then, of course, Trump's approach to foreign policy in general is so based on his kind of sense of bilateral deal-making, his transactionalism, that there could be moments where India could be surprised by certain deals that Trump makes, Trump wants to make with India or wants to make with other countries as well. So I think in terms of continuity and reliability, there's a safer bet with the Harris administration. I think, before we even talk about the foreign policy implications, the other thing to really know about and recognize is that if Trump loses, he is not going to accept it. He has made it very abundantly clear that defeat is not something he's going to accept. He doesn't still accept his defeat in 2020, and the entire ecosystem around him has already started to lay the ground with conspiracy theories about the scams and steal happening right now. So we're heading for a pretty volatile moment in the event that Kamala Harris does win.
Pramit Pal, does it matter from India's perspective who wins? I get the sense by talking to many in government that they believe that Donald Trump might be easier to deal with. They also have a good rapport, the Prime Minister and Donald Trump. Will that make a difference, or do you think that Kamala Harris too is just likely to carry on in the same spirit as Joe Biden?
Well, I think the core relationship will remain exactly the same. The core of China, technology, though the Indo-Pacific, all of that will remain, has been constant with both the Biden administration and with the Trump administration in the past. If you look at the foreign policy teams on either side, we saw our foreign minister met Philip Gordon, who's likely to be the national security advisor of Kamala Harris recently, and didn't seem to have any problems at that meeting, or was reassured that there would be continuity. And I gather some members of the Biden team, including, let's say, CIA Director Bill Burns, would probably continue in a Harris administration. So the continuity is strong. But there will be, yes, areas on the margins in which they will differ. Kamala Harris is a legal person. She tends to be much more focused she seems to be more legalistic, if you wish, in her thinking. So issues like civil rights, the Panun case that's there between India and US will probably become a bit more difficult under her. On the other hand, with Trump, one area which Prime Minister Modi takes very seriously, finance, green finance and climate generally, will almost disappear off the government-to-government agenda because his administration, or he doesn't take that seriously. So, but those are fringe issues. The broad strategic relationship will remain, I think, completely solid, and I don't think that will change at all.
Ambassador Arun Singh, is it correct that the MEA would find it easier to work with a Trump administration? Does Kamala Harris as president and her administration pose a greater headache for India on issues like Khalistani terrorists being supported by countries like the US and Canada? Is there likely to be more prickliness with Kamala Harris than with Donald Trump?
So I can't speak for the MEA or the government. I've been away from the government for more than 8 years. But based on my understanding of the situation and my understanding of how both Republican and Democratic administrations have handled India over the last couple of decades, including the Obama-Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, and the Trump administration, I think we should be broadly okay. There is in some quarters, sometimes a perception that Trump is easier to handle. But if you go back and recall the Trump presidency, he was very, very unpredictable. He criticized India several times for what he said were high tariffs in India. He ridiculed the Indian leaders. He imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from India, ostensibly on national security grounds, which you can't explain if India is a strategic partner. He removed generalized scheme of preferences, under which many Indian products had duty-free access in the US market. And then you recall that in 2019, he invited Imran Khan to the White House when he wanted Pakistan to pressurize Taliban into getting into an agreement with the US. And in that White House meeting, he said that he was ready to mediate on Kashmir, and that the Indian Prime Minister had asked him to mediate on Kashmir, which was simply not true. And the Indian Foreign Minister had to, a couple of days later, say in Parliament that there's no truth to what the President had said. And also in the Trump administration, both governments had tried to do a limited trade agreement. And they discussed that for 2 years, and they couldn't even succeed in getting that. So, the Trump administration will have broadly a positive approach, as we saw with the Indo-Pacific strategy, the starting of the Quad meetings. Similarly, in the Biden-Harris administration, we saw the Quad being elevated to summit-level meetings, and this whole new initiative on critical and emerging technologies, which has really deepened the technology partnership between India and the US. The authorization for General Electric to transfer 80% of technology for the F414 engines, or the authorization for the armed drones to be supplied to India. So these are the things that happened during the Biden-Harris presidency. So I think in the broad strategic convergence that is there, we should be okay with either winning the election. There will be different sets of challenges with the two, and we have to find a way to handle and manage those differences.
Ishaan, how is Trump of circa 2024 looking different from what we saw between 2016 and 2020?
Well, the first thing is that he's older, exhibiting more signs of that age, and there are mounting concerns about his actual acuity and fitness in certain moments. He's had some quite worrying public displays. He is an angrier Trump. He is operating on a lot of grievance. Much of it is personal because of the mounting legal cases that he's faced and that he will be able to evade if he wins the presidency. But then there's also, he is channeling a right-wing nationalist movement that operates on grievance and anger, that is inflamed about various issues, most especially immigration, which may also have interesting wrinkles for the Indian-US relationship. And he's somebody who has really, his pitch to his base has been, this is going to be an all-gloves-off presidency. I'm not going to take any prisoners here. I will be your vengeance. And he's promised all sorts of astonishing executive acts. Some of them he may not be able to actually accomplish. But he's really going to take the U.S. into an interesting chapter of its democracy if he wins.
Why has the Kamala Harris campaign, Ishaan, according to you, failed to take off? When she came in soon after President Biden announced that he was stepping aside, the gap in the polls was much more. From there on, her campaign seems to have faltered to some extent and not really taken off, leading to someone like Barack Obama having to tell black American men not to vote for Donald Trump and instead stick with Team Harris.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's failed to take off. I think, yes, she came in quite late. The circumstances in which she entered were quite extraordinary, but we're seeing a campaign that is trying to build this sort of supposed big tent coalition. She's trying to appeal to centrists, appeal to moderate Republicans who can't really stomach Trump, as opposed to really turning the way Trump does towards the Democratic base, which in many cases are people of color, young people, poorer people perhaps in the cities. She's not making that pitch. She's making the pitch of the centrist establishment, which was the exact same pitch that Hillary Clinton made in 2016. But I think the Kamala campaign is also very mindful of what went wrong in 2016, and they believe that they've cobbled together the kind of votes and the kind of message that will make the difference in these pivotal swing states. And they're doing quite well, perhaps even better than Biden did in 2020 with white college-educated voters. And this is the curious thing. And you're seeing, of course, the Democrats will always win a majority of women, a majority of people of color. But yes, you are seeing on the margins, men especially, and men of color especially, indicating that they are more likely now than before to consider Trump and the Republicans.
Well, before we get to Maharashtra and Jharkhand, there is the results in the United States to deal with. We keep going back to Ishaan Tharoor, Pramit Pal and Arun Kumar Singh. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights on the build-up to the final climax in the US presidential elections. Thank you.
Thank you.
While